Okay, let's get started again. Barry's had a short rest. I won't go through the whole introduction that I gave previously. We have a wider audience here now, and let me just mention that this session's talk is going to focus more on the competitive issues and the antitrust cases. And again, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we'll be talking about the theory of tying, and then at 10:40 after a break, he's going to focus on applications of both bundling and tying to the media industries. So if you're interested in those talks, one of the, as well as being a expert on bundling theory, Barry also has his own business and called Honest Tea. This arose from some ideas he had about a hole in the, we might say, a hole in the product market for both good tea with low calorie and less sugar, which Barry and his student filled and quickly made a company out of it. And thanks to Mark Uretsky, we carry it in the Capitol Cafe here. We have six of the brands. We have Moroccan Mint Green, we have Community Green, Green Dragon, Osmond Black, and we also have Black Forest Berry and Peach Oolong Long, okay, which is Barry's favorite. So this is Barry's business, and we'll turn him over for applications talk this afternoon. Take care.
How many of you, by the way, have tried Honest Tea just as a, all right. It's, the rest of you have to work on this. So first off, just an incredibly embarrassing revelation. The paper I told you about in terms of bundling and charging more with the two constant series, and I said it's done by Rafi, whose last name I can't remember. It's Rafi Mohammed and Patrick DeGraba. So, I can at least report to you that I was accurate about what this paper did. But to the extent that you are curious about the wonderful intricacies of this paper and its brilliant application, Patrick is the person to go to for more on that. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share with you some perspectives on bundling and antitrust. What I'm going to try and do is give you a perspective on all the ways in which you can get market power via bundling. And here, really emphasize intuitions rather than economic models, and then apply it to some court cases. So first, just let's be clear what bundling is. It actually goes back to revolutionary times. It was two people who would sleep in bed together to keep each other warm. But it's also typically the selling items together at a discount relative to what they can be sold on an a la carte basis. Now, it's true that there is one version of bundling which has them being sold at a premium, but then you have to make sure that people really can't take those items and buy them separately, because, of course, it would be a cheaper way of doing it. So for the most part, when we're thinking of bundling, we're thinking about selling items as a package at a discount relative to their a la carte pricing. And what I want to get across is that this world that we live in has lots of increasing returns to scale, that incumbents and large firms tend to have advantages that naturally arise, but that bundling can be used to amplify those advantages. And they can do it in some sense artificially. That is, the way in which they set the prices creates economies of scale, creates value of variety, reduces the value of rivals' products in a way that doesn't have to happen, is often actually lower social welfare, and wouldn't happen if they had to sell items on an a la carte basis. I think it's also the case that the more market power you have, the more you can do with bundling, and therefore, in some sense, the cases where we're most worried about firms with market power, preserving and amplifying it, is places where bundling has the biggest impact. It's also possible, I think, to limit the impact of bundling without actually having a lot of loss or potential loss on consumer welfare. And much of what we see with bundling is not often different than loyalty discounts, and actually the perspective of Paul Klemper on this sort of artificial enhancement of products via loyalty discounts is actually going to be similar to what I'm going to talk about. Although these things all will sound new the way I'll try and present it, in fact, they're not that new. The example that we have of reducing double marginalization that we talked about this morning, earlier this afternoon, of selling two complements and offering a package discount of sort of a ski vacation. That's the horizontal equivalent of double marginalization, or sort of the vertical game. We know about a vertical price squeeze, where somebody who has a monopoly on one ingredient and sells it at too high a price. We'll see this afternoon a horizontal price squeeze, where one component of a package is artificially raised in price. We'll see examples of where they use a horizontal price squeeze to create effectively either a tie, in the sense that the only economic way to buy this good is via the bundle, or effectively predation. A lot of you are familiar with Steve Salop and Sheffen's work on raising rivals' costs. We'll flip that, but it gets very similar effects when we talk about lowering rivals' benefits. It's true that we know with vertical integration, you often will have to compete as an integrated firm. Here, like with horizontal aspects of bundling, you may have to compete as a multi-product supplier as opposed to a single product supplier. And so many of the topics that you're familiar with, you'll see again just coming up in another way. The Chicago school really stopped the research on bundling for the longest time because people thought it just wouldn't get you anywhere. If you have a monopoly in A and competition in B, and you try and make money by selling an A-B bundle, well, as Bork says, there's one monopoly profit, so what do you think you can do selling more money on B? If you thought that the monopoly price of A was 10, and the cost of B is 2, and hence the competitive price of B is 2, and you try and sell a bundle at 12, it's true some people might buy that bundle in 12, but there are people who value A at 11 and B at 0 who wouldn't buy the bundle, but would buy A at 10. And so you're going to choke off some demand that you otherwise wouldn't have choked off, so you could make less money by selling a bundle than you would have just selling A alone. And so why not just sell A? And that's a sense in which it looked like you couldn't take market power in A and lever it into a monopoly. But what that argument misses is the fact that if you have some market power in A and some market power in B, putting them together will allow you to actually have more market power than you had separately. And it also ignores some of the dynamic aspects of, well, maybe B is competitive today, but by the time I've done this leveraging, I'm going to change the R&D incentives in market B. I'm going to perhaps ultimately force people to exit market B, and then perhaps either monopolize market B, or recognize that B is a platform that people will use to enter A, and therefore not necessarily create a monopoly in A, but preserve my monopoly. Sorry, not create a monopoly in B, but preserve my monopoly in A. So I'm going to take you through what I consider to be lots of different reasons to bundle. Bundling can have efficiency advantages. You can save money in the process. You can price more efficiently. Of course, by the way, those efficiency reasons are strategic as well. Because if I can find ways of reducing double marginalization and my rivals can't, then I end up not only being more efficient, but having an advantage over them. But it also has entry-deterrence effects, mitigation of competition, allows me to have ways of having competitive advantage in terms of making my value higher and my rival's value lower, and makes it hard to figure out what's going on. The cost savings, is pretty straightforward. I would rather buy a car than have somebody give me this sort of giant IKEA kit and have me try and have to put it together in my driveway. Moreover, when somebody takes responsibility for the whole system, if something goes wrong on one part, there's no double finger pointing. There's one number to call for Microsoft Office if there's an issue. And that is clearly an advantage. We also know that to the extent that everything is sold on an a la carte basis, you can have hundreds, if not thousands, of choices. And recently, behavioral decision theory says when people are given too many choices, they choose none of the above. And so therefore, it may be that it's in your interest to create standard choice sets or bundles to get people to actually do something rather than to be paralyzed. It's also true that bundling can make for not just lower cost, but better quality. Better quality in the sense that you have common commands, you have things that can be cut and paste very nicely across different applications. And so there's an efficiency reason in that perspective. And then we talked about earlier these reducing inefficiencies. If you thought about buying a ski package and you had to buy your lift tickets, your lessons, your lodging, your transportation, your food, your equipment rental, all separately, you're going to discover that's incredibly expensive. And somebody else will come in there and offer a ski package and just clean up, because they'll be able to do it recognizing that each one of those separate components doesn't have to make all of the money on you. There's sort of one profit they can make on the consumer, and I have a demand that depends on the total price I'm paying, which is why in the end we tend to not always go a la carte, but not always go bundle, but most of the time find some type of package deal. And the hotel realizes they give you the lift tickets, you're more likely to go stay an extra day, pick that resort, and so the mountain and the hotels get together and basically work out a package deal. One of the challenges that occurred in terms of the GE Honeywell case was that the European Union felt that by putting engines and avionics together, GE and Honeywell would be able to price their package more efficiently, essentially avoid a double marginalization, and that their rivals wouldn't be able to compete with that. It's interesting that we would think that's an antitrust problem, because that's avoiding a double marginalization in like a vertical integration. We think that's a reason to have people merge as opposed to a reason not to. But maybe if we think it's something that rivals really can't copy and really can't imitate, because it turns out in this case their profits would go down if they tried to imitate it, it might be an issue of concern. And that's something we really should explore more. So what I'm going to focus on are these strategic aspects of bundling. Network effects, lowering rivals' values, denying scale, some technical bundlings, commitment issues, changing R&D incentives, exclusionary activity, entry deterrents, and mitigating competition. The commitment to fight entry is simply, I've got a monopoly in A, I've got these monopoly profits in A. I've got B, potentially entrant in. So if I say I'm only going to sell A with B, then the only way for me to make my monopoly profit on A is if I sell B. And even if you have a better B, I'm going to undercut you, because I'm going to use all of my A monopoly profits to make sure that my AB package gets sold. You can anticipate that I'll do that and not come into the B market. As a result, I managed to deter entry in B and preserve both my A monopoly and my B monopoly. Now, what's tricky about that is that, of course, if you do enter, I want to take apart that bundle, because, in fact, I'm subsidizing B, and I don't want to be doing that subsidy. And so while it's a nice example of leveraging market power, it has a commitment issue. The next one is a network effect. And I think the telecom example is a good one here. In the UK, we had 4 incumbents, each with approximately 25% share. And then they created a 5th player in the wireless market as a result of the G3 auctions. I guess it's Hutchinson came in. So you have, again, 4 kind of like 25% players and 1 0% market player. And then you have the cell phone companies saying, if you call off network, we'll charge you 60p a minute. But if you call somebody else in the on network, Orange or O, or those calls are free. Unlimited on network calls. And we're beginning to see some of that in the United States in terms of the number of minutes you get on network don't count towards your total. Unlimited AT&T, but not when you go off network. So in that sense, I'm offering you a bundle of all the other customers on my network. And a company that doesn't have market share really can't offer that same type of variety bundle. They don't have anyone. Now, your first reaction might be, well, still, that's not so bad, because let's imagine I have no one, and the other, or, yeah, I have no one. So I've got my one customer. And every call this customer is making is going off network, so I'm going to have to pay this fee. But you know what? Every person who calls my person, I can charge a fee. I can take the fees that I'm getting when the person receives calls and use them to subsidize the fee the person's paying when they make calls, so it's still a wash. And therefore, even though I don't have any customers, I don't have to charge the person a fee to call off network. What's not quite right about that argument is that although I can make my customer indifferent, note, if that person cares about what other people pay to call him or her, then they're worse on my network. Because if they join the other network, other people can call him or her for free, whereas on my network, they're going to have to pay to call. And so I can't have it both ways. Either by going to this off network or this small player, either I'm going to make my friends worse off or I'm going to have to be worse off. And so by this, there's no particular access costs here. I mean, right, we've completely made this artificial. I haven't said there's actually a higher cost of calling on network or off network, but they've created a pricing scheme which says you can call people in my group for free. Outside groups, you're going to have to pay. And even if the calls are symmetric in terms of how many come off the network versus in the network, which you might imagine, you receive as many calls as you make as many calls, nonetheless, the firm with market share disadvantage ends up having a worse economics than the ones who have a large market. So I think this is a sense in which we've, in some sense, artificially created economies of scale and put a small player at a disadvantage where they didn't really need to be. Let me give you another example of a variety bundle, which I think is a little more hidden. If you go out to New York or Washington to LA, and then you come back, you can fly out on United and back on American, but not if you get a cheap ticket. Okay? Why is it they don't let you do the round trip where you go out on one airline and back on another? Any views on this? Well, Professor, I get to ask questions here. So one view is, well, look, forget the cheap ticket, you have to do Saturday night stayover. Okay. The deal is, if you go out in American and back on United, you still have to do the Saturday night stayover. So I haven't changed that price discrimination story. 7-day advance purchase, no problem. I literally asked an airline executive this question. He says, well, I'm sorry? So one view is there's a little bit better price discrimination because, in essence, if I have better scheduled, if you're willing to pay just the right times, then you have to buy 2 one-way tickets, and then you'll pay a little bit more. I find that argument actually, it's true, but I'm not sure. When you compare it to what you're going to see, you'll see if you think it's the bigger one. One airline said, well, look, why would I give up the return portion of this person's ticket? I want them flying both ways on me. To which my response is, well, if they go out in American and back on United, they could have gone both ways on United. So you might be getting the outbound just as much as likely as you are to give up the return. So I don't see why you're going to get a higher market share on one-ways than you are on round trips. It's too complicated? Well, actually, they used to do this. And we have better systems now. So let's imagine that an incumbent has 10 flights and an entrant has 1 flight. Right? Sorry, is there?
I just did a line last year.
JetBlue, Southwest allow you to do that.
Actually, there's
AirTran is another one. Yeah. So I'm sorry. Yes. No. I'm supposed to repeat the questions for those people who are not here. So our friend asked us about, he did Interline last year, but he did it on AirTran, which is actually one of the startups. And you'll see actually why AirTran is the example of a company that would do this for the reason we're going to see. So it's not perfect, but ballpark speaking, if you had an incumbent with 10 flights and an entrant with 1, you might expect the incumbent to have 10/11ths of the market, right? Not rocket science here. But imagine you sell things as round trips. Now what fraction of the market do you expect the incumbent to have? Greater, but what's your ballpark number? There you go.
The likelihood of that 1 out of 11 being the best time in both directions.
So there are 100 options that the person with 10 flights each way has. And there's one round trip option that the person who has 1 flight a day each way has. And so if you care about which combination is the best schedule for you, the person with there's more variety gets, in some sense, a squared advantage compared to where they were before. Now, by the way, customers are worse off, because how many joint options are there? If there was 10 and 1, there's 11. There should be 121 round trips the person can pick from. But if each one forces no interlining, there's only 101 options. So customers have 20% fewer choices. And the incumbent with the advantage essentially amplifies that advantage. And what they're really doing is denying the rival access to their complementary product. I need a good outbound and a good return. Even if the entrant has a good outbound, in some sense they have to enter with both a good outbound and a good return. And it's much harder to do that, sometimes because time of day issues. When is the plane arriving in LA? That plane has to come back, and it may not be the right time to be coming back. What's the solution to this, by the way? Allow interlining, saying, look, there's not a real excuse for this. You airlines haven't told us why you shouldn't do this. You can charge any price you want on the round trip. You can break it up any way you want. But you have to let somebody else match your terms and conditions and then combine your part of the ticket with their part of the ticket. I'm sorry? Well, it's unbundled elements with terms and conditions.
Are you saying you would actually force Delta to sell a value jet or an AirTran seat? Or are you saying
No.
call it Delta,
So,
independently call it?
yeah. Am I saying that I would force Delta to sell an AirTran seat? No. What I'm saying is I would force Delta to sell to AirTran one of their seats that AirTran could then combine with its seat to make a round trip, half on Delta, half on AirTran. And they're allowed to say, our round trip fare of $300 New York, LA, is $220 out and $80 back. And you can pick either part of that you want to combine with your ticket. So it doesn't have to be 150, 150. And also, in order for you to combine your part with ours, you have to ensure that the person buys it 30 days in advance, stays over Saturday night, uses the return part. I mean, all the conditions that you had in the original ticket.
But if you split it so that it's $220 out, 80 back,
Right?
you allow AirTran to supply the outbound flight jet?
Sure. So the gentleman asked if he splits it 220, 80. The answer is AirTran can buy the 80 or the 220. And they have to charge everyone the same 220-80 split. But I'm saying it could be that the return part of this was a night flight, and so maybe it wasn't so good. So I don't require them to split it 150-150. I am neutral as to how they want to divide up those two legs.
No. I was under the impression that one of the reasons interlining died in airlines is that it destroys hub and spoke.
I think it may have some impact on hub and spoke, but what I think it really does is it gives firms who have that hub and spoke a huge advantage over people who have only small number of flights in there. And my own personal experience is I want to fly JetBlue to Salt Lake. I had the perfect JetBlue outbound, but the return didn't work for me. And so in the end, I had to fly Delta. If they interlined, that wouldn't have happened.
But also, if you interline through the hub, you go JetBlue to Salt Lake, and then United from Salt Lake to whatever.
Yeah, so I'm not, that's a separate aspect. I'm not sure I'm saying that. In fact, I'm not saying that. I'm just making it simpler on the out one way on one airline, back on the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, now you can... I've heard that, if you buy a round-trip ticket, you're sort of supposed to fly on both legs. But, I mean, now you can buy a round-trip ticket.
Do you see my op-ed about Scalia in the New York Times?
No.
So it turns out Scalia, when he justified his duck hunting trip, said that it's okay, he paid the same amount as if he had bought a round-trip ticket. Therefore, he didn't benefit from flying on Air Force Two. But actually, the round-trip ticket between Louisiana and Washington is $300. The one-way is $685. He did throwaway ticketing. That violates the airline's tariffs and conditions. So they could have, in fact, charged him the other $385.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is that that's ridiculous, right? And
It turns out Scalia, in his own Supreme Court cases on tariff rules, say it's not ridiculous, that airlines should be allowed to do that.
But I mean, your point is not. I mean, I guess would it get you enough to? Would it get you enough just to, give passengers the right not to, just to fly one leg of a round trip ticket?
Yes and no, because even there, if you thought about the round trip as being $400, that just, in fact, they'd have to buy two. They have to buy a round trip plus a one way. Let's say $200. That cost them $600. That's
Right.
still worse than 2 and 2, if you'd like. So they're still worse off. If I'm JetBlue and I only have a good outbound, they have to buy the round trip on the other person to come back at $400. So you're only making the round trip now equal to the one way rather than more expensive than the.
Yeah, well, I mean, what that leads to is then you have to have some kind of, essentially you're saying you have to have some kind of cost allocation rule because
No,
you want
I have to
some
have a price allocation rule.
A price allocation rule, but,
Yeah.
Zero isn't okay. Is how about, $5?
The airline can put any price allocation rule they want.
Yeah, no, the point is, but zero won't, you say zero isn't good.
Oh, they're fine. If they want to say it's free to go out and $400 to come back, then JetBlue can take that free out.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you allow people to arbitrage.
They can
across
pick
the-
either half they want when they're using
Great.
it.
Okay, thanks.
We'll talk more tomorrow in detail about the Carlton and Waldman paper in 2002. Rand, I think it is. But one of the other things that bundling does is denies entrants a scale that then allows them to actually come in and cover their costs. So a nice example of this is if a hotel forces its guests to eat inside the hotel, then there aren't enough guests perhaps to support a local restaurant. That local restaurant doesn't actually get formed. Given that it doesn't get formed, you want to eat in the hotel because there aren't any other options out there, so you have no problem with the meal plan. And the idea that if I can just divert a small fraction of the customers to my part of the business by this either tie or bundle, and thereby deny scale, I can perhaps prevent entry. I can also do it if there's network effects, which is the more people who are using my product, the more valuable it is. I can force that network going through when I still have monopoly power, gain an advantage so that even if an entrant comes in, now they're starting behind the 8 ball in terms of the network. Something I think people haven't appreciated as much is how bundles can not just raise rivals' costs, but lower rivals' benefits. And the example there that I want to emphasize with this group is both Aspen and cable television packages. The trick is that if I am competing against a bundle, I'm competing against consumers who have in some sense been given too much variety. And I end up being the incremental variety when they already have a lot of different choices that they've been given. and therefore my product is really worth very little. Whereas they might have been willing to pay for it on an a la carte basis, by the time they've been saturated with the bundle, no longer does my product have a lot of value. So I think a great example of this is season passes to movie cinemas. It turns out very recently in France and in London, you can now buy for £20 a month a pass to all the movies you want to see at, I think it's UGC. Now, think about which movie cinema you would buy a pass for. There's one screen, let's say one movie cinema has 10 screens, and one has 3. Okay. Pretty obvious which one you'd pick? The one with 10. Because you don't know what movies are going to be shown, and there's a better chance that the 10-screen one's going to have the right one than the 3. Before that, right, you kind of have this, you'd say 10/13 is what you would get with 10 screens versus 3. Now, you could just get everybody. And in particular, you're going to get all the high-volume users, all the people who really like movies. There's no way that the 3-movie cinema guy can compete against that. Even if they offer the season pass, you're not going to buy the season pass from them. And then having bought the season pass from the 10-screen person, the marginal cost of seeing another movie is 0 there. It's full price at the other. Plus, you've already probably seen too many movies. So you've been movied out, and you have no marginal cost. As a result, the 3-screen person really has trouble competing against this bundle. So the 3-screener could have a special kind of movie. It's true. And that, I didn't say they'll get 0 business, but just think about, again, how hard it's going to be. In the old days, they were getting 20% of the market. And now, unless there's the markets are so differentiated that the people who like those movies don't like any of the others. So it's true. I like art movies, but I also like Bruce Willis. And given I have kids, I go to the showcase cinemas enough so that I basically got to buy that pass. Now I've got the pass. I'm probably going to see a little less Bend It Like Beckham. And by the way, maybe the answer is you say, look, some of this is allowed, but let's draw limits here. Let's limit it to one cinema as opposed to, I don't know, in Washington, is there a chain that's sort of everywhere? So, Lowe's. So you might say, look, Lowe's might do it, but they have to do it by location as opposed to everywhere in the city. And so suddenly if you have everywhere in the city, now it's 100 screens and times and locations, which then says even somebody who has a large number of screens in one location might not be able to compete against it. You're sort of raising the stakes as you do this to sort of 100 screens versus 100 screens, and ultimately you're going to go down to either 2 or 1. Right? Where customers win initially is that they get lower prices, but at the same time they also get perhaps less variety, in the sense that the art cinemas have trouble keeping in business. And if we think this ultimately leads to monopoly, then they won't gain in the long run. We certainly saw this as an antitrust violation in the case of Microsoft, where they said to Dell and others, your season pass, you basically don't pay any extra price no matter how many operating systems you put on your machines. We're going to sell you at one fixed price per person, if you like, per computer, whether or not you use our operating system or not. And now that lowers the value of the other operating system because it's an incremental value, given that you already have the Microsoft one for free. As you offer more variety, one of the things that's interesting is that you could even end up lowering your marginal cost as part of the process. So we'll see that you make your rivals' products less valuable, your products more valuable, and save money in the process. And that, to me, is really creating a competitive advantage. So let's look at this in the case of Aspen. And something else that's relevant to Aspen is, of course, that Aspen was created, in essence, by mergers. And so one of the things you may be thinking about as you investigate and approve or not mergers is say, look, as part of this merger deal, we don't want you to have closed bundles. So whether or not bundling is going to be allowed in terms of the justice folks, our view is that if you're merging and then creating bundles as part of that, it's the exclusion of other people to the bundles is something I'm going to worry about. So Aspen has 4 mountains. 3 of them were created via merger. Aspen itself, Buttermilk, and Snowmass, and then Highlands was independent. It used to be, before the mergers, that there was an all Aspen pass. And it turns out that that's what everybody loved. And people bought it. And then Aspen decided to exclude Aspen Highlands from this. And people didn't like that anymore. So they went back to a pass which has Highlands in it, and they did a revenue sharing based on literally somebody counting who was coming from each mountain. Today, of course, you could probably do that with RFID chips or something else, but you can also even imagine just having a coupon where you had one of each mountain and who clipped it was some way of getting this. And Highlands had some share in the sort of 15% range. But a lot of people seem to want to buy a 4-mountain pass. Now, how many mountains can you ski on at once? 1. So it doesn't cost any more to give a 4-mountain pass than a 1-mountain pass. In fact, it actually costs less, because what happens if one mountain is too crowded? People on that mountain can naturally go to the other mountains because they have a pass that allows them to do it. So you're saying to your customers, you guys figure out the capacity utilization thing. We don't have to put on as many lifts because we now have another mechanism for dealing with overcrowding. You can actually change mountains. In some sense, it's sort of the 1-teller line rather than 4-teller lines. It's a better utilization for us. You like it more because you have more variety choices. So total win here. So Aspen goes back and says, you know, we got to renegotiate this 4-mountain pass with you, Highlands. We don't want to give you the share equal to how many people are skiing on your mountain. We want to give you 12.5% share. And Highlands says that's too low. I'm not going to accept that. So Aspen creates this 3-mountain pass, kicks them out of the deal. It turns out that this is terrible for Aspen Highlands. Their market share falls from 20% to 11%. And they ultimately think they can do a better job negotiating in court than they can with Aspen. Now, one thing is the case. We certainly believe that the 4-mountain pass was efficient. Customers preferred the 4-mountain pass to the 3-mountain pass. It's also the case that Aspen is competing with Vail and Courchevel and other places. So in some sense, I'm not too worried about all these mountains colluding and raising prices because it's only one ski area. Although we'll have to come back to that if we think about allowing these variety passes on a broader scale. If you look at how much it cost, the passes were $22 for a single day, or 6 days for $114. And so if you wanted to ski 5 days at Aspen and 1 at Highlands, in some sense, that only leaves $4 from Highlands at the regular daily price. And it's very hard for Highlands to make money at that deal. And so the incremental price for that 6th day of skiing on Aspen generally is $4. And the question is it really worth an extra $18 to go to Aspen Highlands rather than stay on Aspen for that last day? So the model that I take into account is, let's imagine, perhaps counterfactually, I need to do more field research here, that all 4 mountains are equal. But the customers like variety at V. And so the first mountain, if you like, is worth 1. The second is worth V. The third is worth V squared. The fourth is worth V cubed, and so on. And for argument's sake, we'll make V as a half. Now, initially, Aspen has 3 mountains. Aspen Highland has 1, so it's 3 to 1. But if I take the package, then the Aspen group is worth 1 plus V squared. So 1 1/2, 1 3/4 versus an 1/8. So now it turns out it's a 14 to 1 advantage. So with equal footing, 3 to 1 up to 14 to 1. What's gone on is that instead of being one of 4 possibilities, they've kind of filled me up with those first 3. And can Highlands with 1 compete against the 3? No, because even on equal footing, the 3, if you like, is worth 1 3/4 versus 1, so it's more valuable. Therefore, I'm going to buy it. Therefore, given I bought it, now Highlands becomes the incremental 4th mountain on a 3-mountain bundle, and that's really tough. I can't compete under those bases. I can't get me to be Highlands first, followed by the other 3 being incremental, because they're going to get that solution. They have the better product in that dimension. But they created it artificially, because I could have been part of that bundle just as well as somebody else. So what is their real strategy? I think their real strategy is to drive me out of business, to buy me, to then include me back in the 4th mountain bundle. Are consumers worse off? Well, yes, in the sense that ultimately they lose variety, because now everything is done by the same corporation. But also, if you thought that at the time you were approving the mergers, you wouldn't want this to happen, then you'd say, hey, guess what? As you're thinking going forward about mergers, I don't want the exclusion from bundles. Of course, it was worse still if you look at some of the details. If I bought a 6-day pass, then I'm forcing somebody to ski at Highlands either on day 1 or day 7. Now, they might have wanted to ski there on day 4, so you could have thought, sort of a no-cost Aspen, if you'd like, if you're skiing 7 days, you can ski 6 out of 7, and I'll buy you 6 out of 7, and you have to ski the 7th day at Highlands. But they don't do that, right? So this is the, even paying the full price of a 6-day pass, I'd like to be able to combine the Aspen 6-day pass at their price with my 1-day pass and create a 7-day pass, full retail. But just now allow the person to figure out which of those 7 days they're coming to me. Okay, that, in my view, is the mildest restraint that you'd allow. And then the slightly stronger one is that Highlands should be able to buy a 7-day pass from Aspen at whatever price Aspen charges at 6/7 of the 7-day price to combine with their own 1-day one, and therefore create a 7-day pass. Now, this particular case is complicated because Aspen lost its right of appeal for somewhat technical reasons. And then there's the question of who gets to join in the bundle. Because next thing you know, Aspen will say, well, we need to make a Aspen Vale bundle to compete against Deer Lake. And then, so we need to make a Colorado bundle to compete against Deer Lake and Taos. We need to make a West Coast bundle to compete against Keelington, Sunday River. We need to make a U.S. bundle to compete against Courchevel, Whistler in Canada. And as you know, every ski resort is part of this giant bundle, and they're cooperating on prices because they have to have a bundle, and we're just going to do revenue sharing. And so while variety is good and the bundle makes sense in some case, I want to make sure that it doesn't get extended to the point where next thing you know, we've really lost any sense of competition here. Okay. What else is going on here is a very peculiar aspect. Is Aspen and Aspen Highlands, are they substitutes or complements? They're both. You can't say, you got to be careful on both. Yeah? So the typical answer would be, well, if I raise the price of Aspen, what happens to demand at Aspen Highlands? Now, I don't know if it's going to go up or down. It's actually kind of confusing. And I think actually that's the wrong question to answer, which is before the skier has gone to Aspen, they're complements. Because having a 4th mountain there is good. It brings more people in. After the skier has shown up in Aspen, now they're substitutes. Because I want the person to come to the city of Aspen, but then I want them to ski on my mountain, not the other mountain. So normally, if a good is a substitute, I want its price to be high. Coke wants Pepsi's price to be high. If a good is a complement, you want its price to be low. Microsoft wants Intel's price to be low, unambiguously. Here, Aspen wants Aspen Highlands price to be low to bring people in, but not so low that when they're there, they ski at Highlands rather than Aspen. And that aspect of being the ex-ante complement and the ex-post substitute is something that we really haven't thought of as economists, and we need to do a better job understanding that type of good. And by the way, it's true of many stations on cable TV, if you'd like. More stations gets people to sign up for cable, but then when they're there, they can end up watching the wrong station and hence not getting the advertising revenue or the ratings. Okay? So we're complements in creating this market, but then when the person is bought into it, we're substitutes. And oftentimes that actually creates a real incentive to bundle. If people are left out of the bundle, it's a real problem. So why do you think you can't choose your channels on cable TV? Right? I have this website, whynot.net, where people make suggestions for the world. This is one of the more popular suggestions out there, right? How many of you have heard that consumers want to do this? Any of you not heard this? So why do you think they don't let people do this? I'm sorry? Administrative costs. I'm sorry. Do you really think that's true?
I'll buy more of this product.
You'll buy more which way?
Once they figure out if it's bundled, I'll spend $40 the whole thing, while if I pick and choose, I may only spend $25.
So you think they'll buy less on the pick and choose in the bundle. That just says I should raise perhaps some of the price on the pick and choose. They could, by the way, say, look, the bundle's $40, but you get to pick which 20 stations. So the question is, I'm even willing to give volume discounts as you buy more stations. But why is it they're picking the stations rather than me? It's negotiation with who? Yeah. So I think the reason is not to do with consumers and price discrimination there. I think it's beating up the content providers, which is ultimately, I've created this bundle. If you're not in the bundle, the basic or the extended, then the consumer has so many choices anyway, they're hardly willing to pay very much for something that's not in there. So I now have a real threat against you, which is I can exclude you from one of these bundles. Therefore, you're willing to accept relatively low revenue in order to be in one of the bundles. Moreover, there's no evidence of how much value you have, because we never see how many people went to buy your station rather than some other station. So we can't really prove, or you can't prove to me as the buyer, actually how much demand there is for your item. So we've obscured your value. We've also lowered your value if you're not in the bundle by forcing people, in some sense, to have too many choices. And therefore, use this as our way of improving negotiations. But of course, in the process, we make it much harder for a single product provider or content providers to come into this, because essentially they're now like that Aspen Highlands. They're out of the bundle, and they can basically be told, if you want to come in, sort of on our terms, essentially, we're not going to pay you anything. Whereas if things were a la carte, or people got to choose which 20 they wanted, then somebody who makes a popular thing that customers want will be able to do just fine, getting, in some sense, the fraction of the revenue of the bundle that's being sold. So I think the cable TV bundling is a lot like, actually, Aspen in terms of beating up the content providers and turning them all into Aspen Highlands. It has the extra effect of hiding which mountain is really Aspen. And maybe people just love ESPN or MTV, but nobody can prove that, and as a result, therefore, they can't collect the same way.
Yeah. Barry, how about one other option, that it's the cable operator doesn't want to see price competition among the networks the way airlines compete against each other. There's one airport.
They don't want to see price competition among the networks. Why wouldn't they want to see price competition among the networks?
Because prices would come down and their share of that would go.
This is good. The cable providers are paying networks for content with cable retransmission consent.
No, they're getting a share of the total.
No, they're charging customers $50 a month, and they're paying as little as they can.
Oh, if they set, but then in a sense they're doing price, if they're charging $50.
But that's the way it works, alas.
No, but if you could buy individual channels.
Oh, no, I'm not. You have to
say-
buy it through the cable operator. The cable operator, not directly from the networks, the cable operator says, here's the deal. We're going to charge you this much for ESPN, this much for MTV, or you pick 20 that you want. And they can even be sort of A choices, a premium, they count double or something.
But wouldn't it be easy then to look and say, why not just let the consumer pay the price set by the network?
Well,
that
except-
would facilitate competition, and
Because
they're
the
afraid of
network
that.
never sets a price to the consumer directly. Sorry, wouldn't it be easier to let this is for those folks, let the network set the price directly? This is a case of wholesale. I mean, the networks are the wholesalers. The cable operator is the effective store. And it might be easier going direct, but that's not an option for us. What I want to emphasize at this point is bundling as predation.
Couldn't the bundling also be, though, that it's the price of each channel is so much different for each person? ESPN may be $12 to me.
The value is different for different people.
Right, and so it may be worth $12 to me, and CNN is only worth
A nickel.
quarter, but to somebody else,
So you're arguing.
way, and so by
Right. So my friend over here is arguing that the reason they're doing this is price discrimination, and that they can make people's valuations more homogeneous for the bundle rather than for individual items. One, do we think they're actually putting negatively correlated things together? I don't think so. I think actually people's valuation is positively correlated to how much TV they watch. But two, I think that's still small potatoes compared to this ability to have better negotiating power against the content providers. Now that's a theory and needs to be tested, but I'm putting it out there.
I just want to ask. So, do you believe that tiering is a bad thing for consumers?
I believe tiering. Oh, you've had the microphone taken here. Tiering is bad when you don't get to choose what's in the tier. So if they said tier 1 is 10 cable channels, tier 2 is 20, tier 3 is 30, then it'd be fine. It's a problem when they do the tier and they tell you what's in there.
So tell me what happened. What's your view that the government, the Congress, has in effect forced people to buy the basic service tier?
I'm less worried about one tier is less of an issue than.
In other words, it's like it's a forced bundle that I don't want to buy it if I don't want to see the broadcasters.
So-
I can get them over the air.
So you could imagine even having not a tier at all, starting off with.
Right.
But it gets worse when you get to the real tier that most people buy, which has lots of channels in it. And at that point, you're often saturated, and which makes it then hard for somebody with an extra one that's pretty good. Let's say a BBC America or something. I'd give up a lot of things for that. My friend over here.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I was just having trouble understanding exactly how the bundling was supposed to give the cable operators power of the content providers, because where I'm coming from is the argument that, well, it's the content providers who are forcing the bundling on the cable operators. That's the argument that the cable operators make, We have to provide a bundle because ESPN won't let us buy just ESPN. We have to buy all of this other stuff and offer it in a bundle.
I will point out, at least at the time when cable retransmission was first decided, what the cable operators did is they said to the Fox and others, we won't pay you anything for Fox, but we will give you a new station, a new channel that we'll pay you for. And let me say, it can work both ways with some people who have power, but I'm taking the case of an operator who has essentially a very limited number of content. They're going to find it very difficult to compete on an a la carte basis if they're not part of one of the existing bundles. And as a result, because the bundle has saturated people, in some sense offer them the 1 plus V squared plus V cubed, you're now not 1/nth of the total. You are the last little extra bit of variety, which isn't worth very much. Hence, you're really at the cable operator's mercy not to be excluded from that extended bundle.
It's just, cable channels are by no means a homogeneous product.
Right?
ESPN and HBO, with their multiplexed or not, are very different from the Puppy Channel, Home and Garden Channel,
Right.
all these other things. And basically, when you look at the way the money flows and the splits on advertising and the other things that are, where all the money comes from in this and how it gets divided up, bundling actually begins to make sense because it allows the cable operators to actually draw some revenue streams from advertising they might not otherwise get. Plus, it allows them to mix in some of the high demand stuff with the low demand stuff, and in effect wind up making more money out of it.
I'm just afraid that I didn't hear any theory in what you just said. So
No, there's no theory. It's just
so I've given you a theory which explains why if you created a bundle and you can exclude somebody from it, they're in trouble, and therefore they're going to be in the position of Aspen Highlands negotiating when you've got a three choice, and that strikes me as a pretty good reason to have this. And I haven't heard an explanation of why your story doesn't work. What goes wrong if you say to the customer, you get to pick which 20 channels they are? And if they're the puppet channel or not, nonetheless, people are still going to be buying large numbers, but they're going to be happy because they're going to get the channels they want. And new people who have channels that people like will actually have a chance to have it included in the bundle that the consumers make.
And actually, that story makes it sound like it's possibly advantageous for incumbent cable channels to
Yeah, the incumbent cable channels do better under this scenario.
Right, and so there, in some sense, there's this joint interest of the two parties to actually eliminate.
I see. So I hadn't thought about that. The double effect, which is keeps out entrance and it keeps the cable people having power.
Because the story is that actually the current video programmers at cable networks actually believe they need bundling as well. So they see some advantage there.
This sounds like a model that should be built, and maybe this is the motivation to make that happen.
In some ways, it also helped the new content provider because if it were a la carte, nobody would be familiar with the station, nobody would buy them. This way, they get in the door, free, get exposure.
By the way, if you say it's getting the door free, I could say I could offer it for free too, if I want to. So I'm no worse off if I want to give it away for free. I want to talk to you about bundling as predation. And I think what this is going to do is change your perception of predation from the way we know it and love it to something that actually is scarier still. And what I want you to think about is that you have monopoly in A and you're selling good B as well. And you offer there's some competition potentially in B, either potential entrant or one that's already there. And what you do is you price the AB bundle in such a way that the incremental price of AB over A alone is less than the cost of B, depending on how we want to measure costs. And that, to me, is the example I want to focus on. It's not, as in LePage's case, to me, a defense that the new AB bundle is profitable, because you had an option just to sell A by itself. And the fact that you are not selling A by itself, but are offering an extra item B at less than its cost, is, to me, where the problem is. And the cost that I care about is actually your cost as the monopolist, not a potential entrance cost, because you may have some scale economies. And if it's not profitable for you to be doing this, then I don't understand why you have offered this bundle. You could have made more money without doing this bundle. Well, how is it that I can potentially recoup? One view is that I can monopolize the B market. But in many cases, that's just not going to be so easy. Another view, and this was some sense the Microsoft Netscape, is that B is the platform that people use to enter A. So Netscape ultimately can morph into a competitor to Windows, and that's why I have to fight against Netscape. What I also want to show you is that I can recoup not just in the B market, but also I can recoup right now in the A market. And if I make the B market more competitive, I can raise my price in A. And the end result is, actually, I've lost hardly any money at all, and maybe sometimes nothing. So it's going to be the same story whether we look at this as a horizontal price squeeze, whether we look at this as an effective tie, because the only effective way of buying B is buying it with A, because you can buy B below cost this way. You can't buy it below cost any other way. Or we can look at it as foreclosed. Somebody wants to enter B is foreclosed from the market by the person who has A. So here's my assumed facts. That A has its monopoly, that demand is 100 minus P, that you can produce A at a marginal cost of 20. The monopoly price, therefore, in this case, is 100 plus 20 over 2, or 60. Good B is competitive and has a marginal cost of 25. So that's the scenario that I'm going to start you with. And why is it I'm going to bundle? Well, although we talk about markets being competitive, even if you have any increasing returns to scale, or synergies, or economies of scope, maybe I can actually make money in this so-called competitive B market. Another reason is that maybe I monopolize the B market. Maybe I protect my A market from entry. Maybe what I do is reduce my rival in B markets. I'm in the B market as well. If I can reduce their volume, I can reduce their incentive to innovate because they'll get less return on that innovation. They only get it on their own volume, and therefore gain in a dynamic sense. So here's how the horizontal price squeeze works. Remember, I was selling A for 60 as my monopoly. B is 25 in this competitive market. I offer a bundle at 80. Right? It should have been 85. The incremental cost of B is 20. The price of B is 20. But you can't make B for less than 25, so rivals can't compete. And so now everyone buys the AB bundle. And I've got a world where people are buying B. So you can think about this as not necessarily products that have to go together in the sense of hardware and software, but products that everybody uses. So it could be water and socks. So it's not as if I need to use water with socks, but I am buying water in my life and I am buying socks in my life. And so if somebody's selling it below cost, this is really the right way for me to be buying socks, because I'll never find a better opportunity. Okay? And so we can think about it as a tie, a predatory price, foreclosure. I want to call it exclusionary bundling, in the sense that I use the bundle to exclude rivals from the market. And now I want to show you how it gets even worse. And this is something that David Sibley has talked about. And I think we're sort of on the same track in this dimension. Because, in fact, under the current scenario, it cost me $5 to do this, right? I was sort of $5 worse off. What happens if instead of selling A alone at 60, I raise the price of A to 65? And I make a bundle price 85. Okay. So right, the last example, A was 60, B was 25, and I made the bundle 80. Now I'm making the bundle exactly what it should have been. 60 for the monopoly, 25 for the competitive price, that's 85. But I've raised the price of A from 60 to 65. So now what's the incremental price of B? 20. What's the cost of B? 25. Can anyone compete against that? No. How much money have I given up? I'm sorry?
Didn't you lose sales of A, the reason you had priced it at 60, not 65 originally?
I would have lost sales of A if people were buying A on its own. But now they buy the bundle. Why do they buy the bundle? Because they were buying B in life. You can't get B at 20 because B is really cost 25 to make. And so anybody who's thinking about buying this bundle realizes buying B.
People who weren't buying B in the first place, some of them are not going to buy A anymore.
Yeah. So I want a story where everyone is buying B. So it's like socks in this world, that we all do buy socks at various times in our life. Maybe not. And to the extent that people may not buy B, this argument is a little bit more, has to be refined to some extent. But what I've done is I've, in some sense, made a threat to the customer. I said, if you don't buy my bundle, I'm going to artificially raise my price in A above the monopoly price and penalize you that way. Now, that threat may or may not be credible. But if you believe that threat, now you're going to be led to buying the bundle. And rivals are going to be foreclosed, and the bundler is going to lose no money. So therefore, there's no need for recoupment. By the way, how much does the incumbent lose by charging 65 rather than 60? Well, if they charge 60, I think this is this slide, they make 1,600. Basically 60 times minus their cost, which is 20, on 40 sales. If they charge 65, they make 45 on sales of 35. They make 15.75. They lose 1.25%, 1.5%. Basically, 60 was the optimal price. So if they raise their price from 60 to 65, it essentially costs them nothing. Because that's the nice thing about being a maximum. A slight deviation doesn't change it very much. So the notion they threaten, say, look, we're going to raise our price 10%, basically, that's a really pretty credible threat. It doesn't hurt them. It hurts the consumer a lot. So we want you to buy RB. And here's the deal. We're not going to screw you in any sense, in that it's 60 for A, 25 for B, 85 is the bundle price. But by the way, we so much want you to buy the bundle that we're going to make A 65 alone. What do the B players do against that? They simply can't compete. And so now we have to change our whole perspective on predation. This is something that David's been emphasizing, which is there was no cost. We have foreclosed people, and so therefore we don't really have to look for recoupment.
No, but didn't you pointed out earlier this afternoon that then you'd find some other 8 producer of A?
Actually, I didn't point.
But you said there'd be another bundle. You'd compete against.
So if there, then A, guess what, is not a monopoly. So I'm taking a case where I really do have a monopoly in A. And now what I've done is show you how I've leveraged that into B and effectively gotten rid of competition in B at no cost to myself in A. Again, there's some cost of having made this threat to people. There's some cost if the threat has to be carried out. I might lose a little bit of money. But sort of the second order cost, I have really managed to avoid, get rid of competition. Yeah, so this is the same example again. Let me give you another way in which you can recoup by going after complements. So imagine the value of A is 100, and here probably a good example of this is Windows. And the value of B ranges from 1 to 3. So you might think about this as real player. And you only get value from B if you already buy A, so you can't use B without A. In that world, the monopolist in B would charge 1.5. Okay, just some price. I mean, it turns out that happens to be the right one. What happens if A enters the B market? What will be next? What would we expect? Well, we expect price competition that would bring the price of B down to 0. So the issue there is, well, how does A, the monopolist, make its money back for having entered? Because you're going to have price competition. Well, what happens if the price of B goes to 0? How much do customers value an AB bundle? Well, at least 101. So they only valued A at 100. They valued B at 1 to 3. B is getting for free. I can then raise the price of A up to 101 and not lose any sales. So while I've beaten you up in the B market, and you're now not making any money, and hence you can't invest, or maybe you'll even exit, I can make money because I've actually have the option of using my monopoly in A to raise that price. I couldn't do that beforehand. I couldn't, when you were still there, charge 101 for the bundle. Because if I couldn't charge 101 for A. Because if you're charging 1.5 for B, then enough people will think this bundle is 102.5, and people won't buy A at all. But I have to make sure they're still going to be willing to buy A. And so when I put some heterogeneity in the value of B, then if I compete against it, I can bring the price down to 0 and make a lot of it back on A. And so that's almost, if you like, simultaneous recoupment. I undercut you in the B market, perhaps even selling below cost, or finding ways to not recover my entry, but I capture it back on my complement. Then you exit, and then, of course, I can go back and raise the price of B to 1.5. Zero because, in this case, it was undifferentiated product. And so we have two firms competing in a B market, and their products are the same. Marginal cost is 0. As software would be, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah. And by the way, it could go, let me put it this way. I could bring the price anything down I want. Let's say the costs were 10 and I charge 8. I can then raise the price of A by 2. So customers don't care about whether the price was A or B. And even if B gets lowered further, every time B's price goes down, A's price can go up. And so now, the first little bit it can't. But once I get to the point where everyone thinks this is a good deal, now I can really recover it in A. And if I can't recover it all, I can recover a lot of it. That's sort of the general principle. Yeah. Okay. Imagine the price of B goes to 0. And in fact, maybe that's its competitive price. In fact, perhaps the price could even be negative. So if you're thinking about something like a Netscape, where they could sell advertisements, or they could sell back-end server software, I don't have a problem with negative prices. Now, the only reason we generally have issues with negative prices is that if I'm going to pay somebody for a product, they better use it. So what does that really mean? It means I have to make it the default. And now one of the problems, if I do a technical bundle, which says B comes with A, and you're not allowed to make your product the default, now I can't offer a negative price. And therefore, I can't really compete here. And so that's another problem, is not only can I necessarily drive the price of B to 0, I can drive it to 0 and not allow them to go negative, which, in fact, they might want to do. And so that's another way in which bundling creates an issue. And I thought I'd just end with actually some examples of how this works in practice. So in Australia, people who need dialysis get various products. There's something called large volume fluids, perinatal fluids, irrigating solutions, and perinatal dialysis fluids. And I hardly know what any of these things are, which I think is my good fortune. And here are the prices that Baxter offered to sell this to hospitals for in Australia, in the southern part of Australia. So it came out to $6 million if you bought the things individually. It turns out Baxter is the only firm who supplies these three products in Australia. Mostly these things are water in bags, and therefore it's pretty hard to ship this across oceans. Also, it turns out the government of Australia imposes 20% kind of like tariffs, or just if you buy somebody else's product, you have to add 20% to the price in comparing a bid. And so therefore, it's really hard to compete shipping water with a 20% policy against this. But the PD products have higher value, and therefore people are willing to import them. And so there's been some competition in this market. So Baxter says, here's our price if you buy a la carte. If you buy on a package deal, we'll give you these prices. Now my first comment is the individual price that they offer you on this really doesn't mean anything, because you can't just buy this product at that price. It means a little something in the sense that if I buy more of these products, this is what I'm going to pay on the margin. Okay, I'm going to get a 39% discount. But for the most part, I have a sense of what I'm buying. It's based on how many people I have with these diseases. And this is also a sense in which I am buying A and B. Right? I have to buy PD products, I have to buy LVP products. So my view is that this is the wrong way of thinking about it. It says I have to buy these three products anyway. What I should really do is take these three prices as given and ask, how much extra do I pay for the bundle versus these three? And depending how good you are in your mathematics, one thing you will discover is that these three products right here end up costing more than the bundle. In fact, the price of these products here is minus $385,000, which it turns out is really below cost, depending on however you measure it. And sure enough, they won that bid. Now, it gets a little bit different if you go to New South Wales, the market's a little bit bigger. Again, if I apply the discount on PD products, so note the total savings is 8 million, 8.7 million on 10.9 million of list price. So now actually, again, I've sort of taken all the discount of 8.7 and applied it here. Now it's an 80% discount. But mind you, this is 80% off a product for which they were facing competition. So it's a product which had the smallest margins to begin with. Now they're still arguing actually that this is not below their cost, which to me is pretty shocking. And they're arguing it for a couple of reasons. One, that their sales were bigger than what they thought they were going to be. But it turns out the sales of the other products were bigger too. Secondly, they claim that the cost numbers we're using were based on their anti-dumping claims, and therefore were inflated. But of course, what they've also shown is anybody who now comes in with a lower number would actually be guilty of dumping, because they actually won the anti-dumping. So they've really foreclosed competition. And the third is they claim, well, actually we weren't 100% certain about that monopoly. We're only 90% certain about it. And if you do that story, so I have good A, where I'm going to make $100 with 90% chance, and product B, which I'm going to get essentially at cost at 50% chance. But if I sell them a bundle at 113, I'm sure to sell the bundle. And so in some sense, it's true that my incremental price of the bundle is 13, where my cost is 20, so it looks like I'm engaged in this. But I also got an extra 10% chance of selling A. And the extra 10% chance of selling A is basically worth another $10, so I'm making money. Well, that's all true, but guess what? I could have, in that sense, argued that I should have just charged $93 for A. Or I can say, you know what? This is another case of this zero-cost predation. It turns out that in this world, 10% of the time we'd have had entry into this market. 50% of the time we'd have had entry into this market. Now we have entry 0% of the time. And I don't think that's a good thing. Here are the two Supreme Court cases that looked at the same issue. In the cephalosporins, Lilly had essentially a monopoly in 4 of these things which are hard to pronounce. Keflin, Keflax, Loridine, Cafacin. And then there was entry in the 5th product. It turns out a Japanese company licensed this 5th cephalosporin to SmithKline, who ended up doing great with it, a product called Ansif. And Ansif was outselling Kefsol, which was making the people at Lilly quite upset. What happened next is that Lilly decided to lower the price of Kefsol to try and be the leader there. SmithKline matches, they lower the price. They enter a price war. SmithKline's still winning. And worse still, it turns out Kefsol is a substitute for their bread and butter one. That is, let's call it A, Keflin, one where they're making all their money. And so they're not gaining share, and by bringing the price of E down, they are substituting more for A. So they come up with a new plan, something called the RCP, the Revised Cephalosporin Pricing Plan. And the deal is that you get 3% off the bundle if you buy essentially A, B, C, and D from everything from Lilly. You actually had to buy 3 products in enough quantity, but you were never going to make it with D, C, and D. So you had to buy A and B for sure. Now, since you had to buy A, B, C, and D from Lilly anyway, because they were the only suppliers of those products, if you take 3% off your total purchases, and I'm just going to pretend the whole market is your purchase, then you save $1.68 million on $8 million of purchases, or essentially you save 20%. And it turns out that the Lilly's pre-tax return was 17.6%. And so a 20% discount on 17.6% returns doesn't make money. Now what's interesting, of course, about this is I'll note the court did not use sort of average variable cost or sort of marginal cost pricing. This is really, in some sense, average cost pricing, because that's what they're looking at as total return. The next thing is that actually they noted that SmithKline was making 4.6% prior to this discount, so you actually want to take off 20, so you'd be making minus 15. They said even at 4.6%, this wasn't enough to stay in this market. And now we're hitting them with another 20% off. So even if they got Lilly's cost efficiencies, they would be losing money because take 20% off this number. And I actually think that wasn't a crazy analysis, which is the notion that you would actually stay in a market where you're just capturing your variable cost is really not going to happen. The notion that in some sense, the 20%, the 80% discount, it still allows you to compete, I think is nuts. 20% might be closer to that case. But they did this as a tie-in sale as opposed to a Section 2 violation. So effectively, the only way that you could really buy cost-effectively good E was by buying it through A, B, and C, through the bundle. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is that there was a little insidious aspect of this bundle that most people wouldn't have noticed. What about if Lilly just cut the price of Kefsol by 20%? Well, one problem is that it might have been matched, but maybe that would have not been matchable. But if they did that, next thing you know, there'd be more substitution of E for A, because E is now cheaper. Why doesn't the bundle do this? What happens if I decide to buy another unit of E to substitute for A? How much do I pay? Well, I get E at 97% of its price, right, because it's 3% off. I'm giving up 1 unit of A, because I'm substituting E for A. A costs twice as much as E. So I'm giving up 3% on something that was twice as expensive, so I'm giving up like 6%. So hence my marginal cost of another unit of E is actually 103%. So they've given me 20% off on my infra-marginal purchases, sort of on my last year's purchases, but if I want to buy more, now actually they're going to charge me a premium. So this is brilliant. You provide a price which your rivals can't match, and at the same time, you stop people from having incentive to substitute. And the extreme version of this would be to say to the customer, look, we'll give you E for free under the condition you don't buy any more of it than you used last year. And I don't think that aspect of the bundle has been really appreciated. So when you're doing these bundle discounts of sort of 3% off your whole purchase, which is sort of like a LePage discount if you'd like, it makes a huge incentive to substitute E for A, my E for your E. But it doesn't make an incentive to substitute more E for A. So if it's generic tape, I'm going to use 3M's generic tape rather than LePage's, but I'm not going to want to buy more generic tape because now on the margin, generic tape is expensive. Because I'm giving up my sales of the branded tape, which I was getting that discount on, which I now have to give up. Right, so effectively, I'm giving you a lump sum of money as a discount, which you might naturally apply over your last year's sales. But that lump sum doesn't really extend to marginal numbers. And hence, what we've really done is created a low infra-marginal price and a high marginal price, which therefore is tough on competition, but also not good for consumers. Like it keeps prices high. And then I guess the last case is just Ortho versus Abbott. This is a case where the Supreme Court thought it wasn't a problem. And Ortho had this very complicated deal in terms of how much the prices were if you bought 3 of their tests, 4 of their tests, 5, and so on. It turns out that Abbott had essentially a monopoly in HTLV and HIV, 91% and 86% share. So you sort of had to buy those 2 tests from them. And what people point out is that if you have to buy these 2 tests, and I throw in HCV, these 2 plus HCV cost more than all 5. And so therefore, if I'm Ortho, I can't compete against Abbott in the sense that I can't just sell Anticore and HBS-AG. Because the other 3 tests that I'd leave are more expensive than the 5 product bundle. So that looks like it's a problem. But note that it's not quite a problem in the sense that what about if I sell Anticore and HCV. Then these are the three products that you have to buy from Abbott. And the price of these three products is actually less than the 737. It turns out that when you take care of the hardware, it's less by $1.77. And Ordover, who was the expert for ortho in this, that is the plaintiff, said they could have made money selling those two tests at $1.77. Well, in that case, it's not exclusionary bundling, so perhaps I shouldn't worry about it. And so as a result, we now have sort of a consistent theory, which talks about how it is that you can use a bundle to create something that's like predation, how it is that we sort of have our test, is it a problem or not? We don't really have to think so much, in my view, about recoupment in these cases, because there's recoupment via the complement, there's recoupment via the artificial inflation of the prices to begin with. And perhaps what I've done, what I hope I've accomplished, let's see. Yeah. So actually I am done. What I've accomplished is giving you a sense of all the different ways that bundling can be done. It's not just about price discrimination. It's not just about bundling things with negative correlation. You can bundle complements to deal with double marginalization. You can bundle substitutes to create variety packages. You can do bundles to obscure prices. You can do bundles to reduce rivals' values. In some sense, the theory of bundling is as rich as the theory of pricing. And there are all sorts of ways that market power can be extended, not necessarily just sort of the Chicago School of into something that's perfectly competitive, but when we realize the market powers that exist, this is a tool that I think we actually are seeing lots of, that we don't really yet fully understand. There's a lot of work to be done, and you've got some of the great people here doing it. And so I'm happy to stick around for some more questions. We'll explore these issues tomorrow in terms of applications to the FCC. I thank you for your attention, and I think we're all set.
We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9.
Just two comments. In congressional testimony, the cable operators have said that they cannot afford to